Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast.
Never heard so much malarkey in my whole life. Every single thing he said is a lie. Every single one. He has no idea what the hell he's talking about. This guy has no sense of American democracy.
They spent money like a bunch of people that didn't know what they were doing, and they don't know what they were doing. It was the worst, probably the worst administration in history. He's the worst president in the history of our country. He's destroyed our country.
It didn't even start with a handshake. CNN hosted the first debate in this presidential campaign, featuring presumed nominees Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And as you heard, the mood was not friendly. There were personal barbs. But at the end of 90 minutes, what's making the headlines are Joe Biden's repeated stumbles and Donald Trump's repeated falsehoods. John Fund is a columnist for the National Review and a senior fellow at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. Craig Varoga is a Democratic strategist. He's based in Washington, D.C. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Pleasure. Craig, we'll get to the specifics in just a moment, but how bad was this debate for the Democrats?
Look, Vice President Harris last night said the president got off to a slow start. There were rough moments. It's also apparent that he had a cold, but I don't want to spin anything. It was kind of sluggish. It was a brawl, but at the end of the day, Donald Trump, wouldn't condemn the people who rioted and tried to overturn the election. He wouldn't reject, and he still bragged about overturning Roe versus Wade. And he had no answer at all about, being a felon. Instead he talked about porn stars and he talked about golf, and he, made at least 30 lies, over the course of the debate. So I think that, as time goes on, it's like President Trump's complete, unqualification for the office. Is like if you look at it, if you look at it as a media consultant, Donald Trump said a lot of things that you can put in TV ads, that are not good for him.
We'll come back to that in a moment. John Fund, broadly, your first blush impressions of this debate.
Well, first of all, no, it was not a good debate for Donald Trump. He was the same as he usually is, blustering and all of that. But for once, I think your readers deserve something better than the White House spin machine. The president, if he had a cold, was working the rope lines, shaking hands with dozens and dozens of people in Atlanta as he landed last night. If you have a cold in the age of COVID, you don't do that. If the president had a cold, he was being completely irresponsible and shaking hundreds of hands. So let's start with, have no more White House spin machine. I'm not here to spin for Donald Trump. Let's not have ridiculous spin machines for the White House.
The reason that people are asking questions about Joe Biden, and there are questions being asked, which we can get to, about his future in this campaign, are because of moments like this. Have a listen to Joe Biden last night.
What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 million, billion dollars, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Craig, when that happened, what was going through your mind?
What was going through my mind is that, I hope that he would answer the question again.
What was the bar that you think was set for Joe Biden in this debate? And did he meet that bar?
Look, even the vice president said he got off to a sluggish start. His campaign co-chair said he got off to a sluggish start. I think that when he spoke from the heart, he did better than when he was, trying to, reiterate like a bunch of talking points. And if you look at it tactically, rather than, the contrast between two candidates, he was trying to, in many cases, he was trying to fact check Donald Trump in real time, which I think, is, impossible to do.
For a lot of people, the test was also whether, there had been questions around his age, and those questions had been dismissed by Democrats, been dismissed by people close to him, and they said, just watch him, watch what he does on stage. To a lot of people, This was the test. Do you think he passed that test?
I think that they're going to have to continue answering that question. And I think the next week is going to be, very critical for them. And I think that, the vice president began to answer that last night, but the president's going to have to answer it as well.
John Fund, what do you think the bar was for Joe Biden in this debate?
Well, first of all, let me agree with Craig. I don't think the president's performance was as bad as the media critics who are suddenly discovering we are shocked that Joe Biden is older saying. However, just remember, he spent a week on debate prep at Camp David, surrounded by skilled media advisors. Who knows, what, vitamins or other supplements he was taking. He had all the time in the world to come up with a better performance than this. And what CNN and polling for the Daily Mail in Britain say is that 68% of voters think that Donald Trump won the debate, and more importantly, 68% of independent voters. So I think it is devastating because the American people who do not follow politics on a daily basis were shocked. And frankly, this is a media failure in the United States, because if the media had done its job, it should have had an alarm bell in the night in February. In February, the president went through a physical in Walter Reed Medical Center. He passed the physical. His personal physician issued a very short statement of 4 paragraphs saying the president was fine physically, but he noted he had not given him a cognitive test. And in addition, he refused to answer any questions from reporters, which is generally, when given presidential health cover-ups in America, ranging from John F. Kennedy to Franklin Roosevelt on down the line, is a warning that there's a cover-up. The media completely failed the American people in not alerting them to Joe Biden's problems long before Joe Biden demonstrated those problems himself last night.
Craig, do you want to respond to that before we get to Donald Trump's performance?
I think it's interesting that, John said that it wasn't a complete disaster that, maybe some people in the media, are saying it is. And it's like, I think that the Biden campaign has a challenge. They have to deal with it. We'll see, how that goes. I mean, but I also think that, we saw the same Donald Trump as ever, as John also pointed out. And it's, at least 30 lies. It's hard to keep track of them. Maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe, telling the truth doesn't matter in some context, with Donald Trump. The interesting thing about this race, and it's one of those things in which, people spend a lot of time trying to understand this thing. On the one hand, it's very static, that a felony conviction for Donald Trump doesn't really change, the polling by much. If the post-felony can, bump in the polling for President Biden, it was maybe 1 point, 1.5 points. It really wasn't very much. We'll see how this plays out. We're not going to know for a couple of days, what it actually means.
John Fond, you said that Donald Trump did not have a good night. Let's have a listen to Donald Trump last night.
We had the safest border in the history of our country. All he had to do was leave it. He decided to open up our border, open up our country to people that are from prisons, people that are from mental institutions, insane asylum, terrorists. We have the largest number of terrorists coming into our country right now, all terrorists, all over the world, not just in South America, all over the world. They come from the Middle East, everywhere. All over the world, they're pouring in. Look, we had the safest border in history. Now we have the worst border in history. There's never been anything like it.
John, what did Donald Trump have to do in this debate last night?
Well, it turned out that all he had to do was abide by the rules that Joe Biden applied to the debate. Whatever political consultant told Joe Biden, well, Trump interrupted you too much in the 2020 debate, so we'll cut off his microphone when you're talking so he can't interrupt. Whoever gave him that advice should be fired, because it turned out that restrained Donald Trump and his natural inclination to go out of control, and it just gave more Biden time to hang himself. It's just one of the most astonishing political blunders I've ever heard of in my entire life.
Does the truth matter? I mean, the commentators have pointed out, and Craig has mentioned as well, a long stream of falsehoods that came out of Donald Trump's mouth. Does the truth matter?
Excuse me, wait a second. They have pointed out a long stream of falsehoods that came out of both of their mouths.
Both of their mouths, but people specifically are talking about what Donald Trump said here.
Yeah, because I understand that, and Donald Trump lies without consequence. I understand all that. But Joe Biden makes stuff up too. He just does it in, shall we say, a less obnoxious way.
Does the truth matter? I mean, I think there are people who would argue that you're creating a false equivalency between what Donald Trump said and what Joe Biden said. But the
polls don't agree with you. They don't agree with you. So you may have that opinion, but people believe that all politicians lie. They do. And Donald Trump lies more than most. Of course he does. But the bottom line is, the American people have reached the point where 73% do not want this race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So I agree with you. Believe me, Donald Trump is not my candidate. But there has to be an explanation, and reporters are supposed to look at reality. Why is it that 73% dislike both candidates so much they prefer somebody else we're running?
I heard somebody in one of the pre-debate spins saying that I'm not comfortable with Biden's age and I don't feel comfortable with Trump's mouth. Coming out of this, Craig, what happens now? I mean, can Joe Biden stay in this race? You said that there are going to be conversations this week, difficult conversations within the Democratic Party. We heard David Axelrod, former Obama advisor, saying that there will be discussions about whether he should stay. What happens?
Look, I mean, I'm not sure, what's going to happen. I mean, we're in again, this race is a long time. We have the same two candidates who ran 4 years ago, but at the same time, so in some ways it's very familiar, but in other ways it's very different. And I mean, can he? Should he? I think certainly the president, plans on staying. His campaign,
What do you think, though, as a Democratic strategist? What do you think coming out of yesterday? Do you think he should stay?
I think they have a lot of work to do in the next week to reassure the American public and the Democratic Party.
And what would that look like? I mean, if he stays, how do you reassure people? And can they reassure people if he does stay?
Look, I think that, Joe Biden himself has always said that, it's like, no candidate ever runs against the almighty. Everybody runs against, the alternative. And as John and many other people, say Donald Trump lies, at an unprecedented scale. And, I think that, I think that, just on regardless of, what the ultimate, question may be or, what happens here, it's like the more they talk about Donald Trump, the better. And I think that, it's like, as John just said, it's like, it probably was a fairly serious tactical mistake to have Donald Trump's mic turned off, because that allowed him to appear far more temperate than he really is. So it's like, I think they need to talk about, Trump as much as they can, over not just the next week, over the next, 19 weeks or whatever, whatever it might be. I guess
you just wonder whether they'll be talking about Trump at all, though, whether the conversation will just be focused on Joe Biden.
You mean within the campaign?
Yeah, I mean whether the conversation is not going to be about the opponent, but is going to be about the nominee and who that nominee should actually be.
Yeah, I mean, look, that is not a question that any campaign would want to deal with. A month and a half or 2 months before their convention. And, clearly, everybody's going to be, a lot of people are going to be asking that question, so people in campaigns like countries get determined by, how they deal with a crisis. And, they have to deal with this, over the next, week, over the next 2 months in order to, be, more reassuring. And campaigns and politics are not easy, but then there are a lot of big macro or structural issues that are going on here that where the Democrats should have an advantage, where the Biden campaign should have an advantage, but it'll take time. We'll see.
John, do you expect Joe Biden to be the leader of the Democratic ticket come November?
What you are witnessing now is a slow motion coup. And it started during the debate last night when at a watch party that various Democratic congressmen were attending, they all turned to each other and said, "Oh my God." And one of them said, if we're on the same ballot as this guy, we're not going to keep the Senate, we're going to lose the House, and we're going to go suffer horribly up and down the ticket. And another Democratic donor told me please name me the name of the major Democratic donor who will give Joe Biden a penny more now. A penny more. There is no such person. So the Democrats are going to mount a slow motion coup behind the scenes, and the spin machine isn't working. And it's going to be tough because Joe Biden is one of the most stubborn people in the political world. But there is a way to do it. The only problem is that the likely success probably involves elevating Kamala Harris, the vice president, to the Democratic ticket at the top. And if that happens, she's less popular than he is. That's not necessarily a solution. That trades one problem for another. Now, there are other candidates who might do better, Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. But the logistics of removing the first African-American woman to serve as vice president and replacing them with someone, shall we say, who doesn't meet the identity politics of the Democratic Party, that's a daunting task. But the Democratic Party is almost in the same way that they united in 2020 to stop Bernie Sanders and elevate Joe Biden when they should have known better because of his limitations in 2020. They are now uniting behind the scenes to try to figure out a way to push him off the stage. I just don't know if it will work.
There is an argument that the Republicans would find themselves in trouble if Joe Biden were to be replaced, because then the attention would be focused on Donald Trump, a candidate who, as you admitted, did not do particularly well in the debate last night. Is there weight to that suggestion?
It's an argument. The only problem is, remember, it's the Biden-Harris administration. So all of the problems that people are blaming Joe Biden for, inflation, foreign policy disarray, are the Biden-Harris record. So yes, there would be a little more attention on Donald Trump, but I don't think it would dramatically change the race because, I know that there are attempts to say that Kamala Harris's interviews last night were evidence of new political genius and skill on her part. Objectively speaking, that's simply not true.
Just before I let you go, I'll ask you both this. And you both hinted at this, that many Americans are not happy with either of these people being on the ticket, and that this is not the fight that people wanted. Coming out of this, John, what could possibly change here? Did this change anybody's mind?
I think what we have is a complete failure of the two-party system in America. The Republican Party has to bear a terrible responsibility for having Donald Trump take over the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party has to explain, how in the world did you nominate this guy? You knew his problems. You knew that Barack Obama had complete contempt for him as vice president, despite the fact he does fundraisers for him. He once famously said, there's no limit to how much Joe Biden can blank up a situation. And Obama's own defense secretary, Robert Gates, said, Joe Biden has been on the wrong side of every foreign policy issue for the last 50 years. So both parties have to explain to the American people, how did you nominate these people? And I think, frankly, keeping Robert F. Kennedy off the ballot, I'm not a partisan for Robert F. Kennedy, but using thuggish tactics to make sure that he would not appear on the debate stage last night simply shows that the two-party system isn't delivering choices the American people want, and frankly, has failed the country. Because to end up with a Trump-Biden race is a failure of democracy.
Craig?
Look, clearly 3/4 of the American public are unhappy with their choices in this election. Clearly, I think that, when the polling sorts itself out, over this, which is not going to happen in 24 hours, people are going to be going to remain, unhappy, with their choices. And that's unfortunate. But, I think that, John alluded, not just the United States, but a lot of countries are, going through some significant internal turmoil for a number of reasons on, some of the same issues that are happening in the United States. But, that each country is somewhat different. In some ways, everybody needs to ask what kind of country we want, over the next 4 years. And, that's a very difficult conversation to have. I don't think that we've had it as much as we should have. And again, we're living in unprecedented times. We have people surrounding Donald Trump who condemned him and voted for impeachment 3.5 years ago. I've said before on CBC, it's like, we're going through a very unhappy time in the United States. And that was true 4 years ago, and it's true today.
It's a long road until November. We will talk again before we get there. In the meantime, thank you very much for this morning.
Thank you, gentlemen.
John Fund is a columnist for the National Review, senior fellow at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, and Craig Varoga is a Democratic strategist based in Washington, D.C.